All right, welcome back. All right, so last time I introduced you to a handful of problems with the idea that you could have free will. Today we want to unravel those problems. And, well, that's just it. Now, a few reminders. First of all, again, laptop policy, be on the left. Secondly, lastly, you've got an assessment task due quite soon, so get going on that. There's been an email put out by Jenny, not an email, well, it may have been mailed to all of you, but it's on the News and Announcements forum, where Jenny gives a bit more information about what we're expecting with regard to the assessment tasks. So have a look at that as you write yours up. And again, make use of your tutors. Okay. So last time I introduced you to a handful of terms. We're just going to review those quite quickly, so that way you just get in the right headspace to have the conversation we're supposed to have this morning. All right. So first off, what are we talking about when we're talking about free will? What's this concept? Well, here is, once again, a very common way in which philosophers characterize this concept of ours. All right, so I'll read it. You pay attention. Underlined parts are the important parts. When an agent acts freely, it's up to her whether she does one thing rather than another. A plurality of alternatives is open to her, and she determines which she pursues. When she does, she is an ultimate source or origin of her actions. Okay? So the idea behind free-willed actions are actions that are under your control in an important sense. All right. Now, further matters. Well, what conditions have to be in place if any action you perform is going to satisfy that kind of characterization? Well, Taylor draws our attention to a few conditions. One, there has to be nothing that prevents your action, right? If you're going to freely drink a cup of coffee, there has to be nothing that prevents you from drinking the coffee. If you're going to freely drink a cup of coffee, there has to be nothing that forces you to drink the coffee, right? If something forces you, then the action of drinking the coffee isn't stemming from you. You're not the source. You're not the origin. Whether or not you drink the coffee is not up to you, right? So you can see why this condition is in place. And lastly, it has to be the case that you could have done otherwise. Once again, it's hard to see how you can freely choose to do something if you couldn't have done anything other than what you actually do. Or at least that's the thought behind this kind of condition. There has to be some important sense in which, when you act freely, you could have done otherwise. Okay. Let me pause here. Do you have any questions about these conditions? Do you feel they're intuitive force? Does that make sense? All right, I'll take your silence as consent. All right, more key terms, concepts. All right, so we've got fatalism, we've got determinism, we've got compatibilism, and we've got libertarianism. All right, so let me just get the review process going by giving you a brief quiz. Why don't you turn to the person next to you, characterize these concepts for each other, all right? Jog each other's memories, and then I'll go through them quite quickly. All right, just give it a couple minutes. All right, so we're growing silent, so I'm going to say I think most of you are near done. What's fatalism? Anybody? Yeah, everything's set in stone. General way of thinking about it. More specifically, everything that happens is unavoidable. Right? There's nothing that occurs that could have been avoided. Right? So the future is fixed just as the past is fixed. Right? There's something you did yesterday. Just think about it, whatever it is. Of course, there's many things you did yesterday, but just think about one thing in particular. The past is fixed, right? You can't change what you've done. The fatalist says the future is just like that. There's no changing what will be. What about determinism and indeterminism? Well, one way of keeping tabs on this concept is just different pictures of the future, right? These two pictures depict the past in exactly the same way, straight line. That is, there's just one way things have been up to the present. They diverge in thinking about the future. The indeterminist thinks that the future is a garden of forking paths, right? There are just different ways things could turn out. You might finish at this university, you might finish at another university, you might finish at no university. Right, there's just different ways on the indeterminist portrait. But for the determinist, there's just one way things can be. Just one way. Any questions about determinism? All right. Compatibilism. Right, this should be easily remembered just because it says that free will and determinism are compatible. Right? So the straight line portrait of the future says compatibilism is completely consistent with free will. Right? There's no contradiction. There's no conflicts. Incompatibilism, by contrast, denies that. It says that there is conflict. And then libertarianism is a three-part view. The libertarian thinks that you, in fact, have free will. They think that the garden of forking paths picture of the future is correct. Right? So they're indeterminists. And they also reject compatibilism. The libertarian thinks that there is a fundamental conflict between there being a unique way the future will pan out, right? The straight line portrait, the determinist's portrait, the fatalist's portrait. They think there's a fundamental conflict between that and having free will. Right? In order for you to have free will, in order for there to be genuine possibilities, we have to have the forking path picture. Okay. Now, I gave you a handful of arguments last time for thinking you don't have free will. And each of them had embedded in them an assumption, the incompatibilist assumption. The idea that free will and determinism are just simply not compatible. You can't have both. So if you go compatibilist, you very neatly, you very elegantly, you very quickly disarm all the arguments. If you say that free will is compatible with determinism, if you say it's compatible with fatalism more generally, then you got a really neat way of just not worrying about all the problems. And the condition that's central to the compatibilist picture, right? Because the compatibilist doesn't want to deny that in order to act freely, it has to be true that you could have done otherwise. They really want to say that if you freely drink a cup of coffee, it has to be true that you could have refrained. Right? They don't want to fuss with that. But what they want us to do is to understand the condition in a particular way. They want us to understand it in this way. If you had chosen to do otherwise, if you had chosen to not drink the coffee, then you would have not had the coffee. If you freely put on your left shoe before your right shoe, then it has to be true that if you had chosen to do something different with your feet, you would have. Right? And that's completely consistent with maintaining that you couldn't have done anything. That's completely consistent with maintaining that you could not have made a different choice. Right? So seeing that these two claims are consistent is quite important. Let's think about the past, right? The past is fixed, right? So what's something that happened in the past? The towers in New York were attacked and fell down, right? We can't change the past. Still, we can make true claims about things that would have been had the towers not fallen. Right? Like, business would have been, had the towers not fallen, there would still be business being conducted there. Right? That's true. No, but they've fallen, and we can't change that. So in a sense that the fact that there's no longer business being conducted in the towers is unavoidable, because there are no more towers. Still, it's true that if the towers had not fallen, business would be continued, would continue to be conducted in them. Right? So there's no inconsistency here. All right. New term. So the compatibilist is someone who says free will and determinism are compatible. The soft determinist kind of puts all these pieces together into a portrait of what it takes to act freely. Now, the compatibilist, the soft determinist is a determinist. All right, that should not be a surprise given the name. They're also a compatibilist. Right? They think that compatibilism is true. And they think that we are able to act freely so long as the following conditions are satisfied. Our actions are not obstructed, right, again, so the intuitive constraint. They're not constrained, they're not forced, right, there's nothing making you do what you do. No external force anyway. And then lastly, this final condition, your actions, or your free actions anyway, are caused by appropriate mental states. Caused by appropriate mental states. Now, what are mental states? They're states of mind. Things like beliefs, desires, hopes, fears, right? Anything you might talk about in a psychology class about the individual is likely to be a mental state. So what are the appropriate mental states? Well, it's going to have something to do with mental states that lead to choice in an ordinary way. So ordinarily, we make choices on the basis of our strongest desires. Right? So if you really want the coffee and you choose to get the coffee because you really want the coffee, your choice is stemming from your desire, and it's not stemming from something outside of yourself. Right? The action is resulting from you, from your mind, from your choice. And so the soft determinist wants to say that when you act freely, there has to be nothing that prevents you from acting. Right? So when you freely drink the coffee, there's going to be nothing that prevents you from drinking the coffee, nothing that forces you to drink the coffee. And when you drink the coffee, your drinking it has to stem from you, from your mind, from appropriate mental states. Right? So from ordinarily, this is going to be from your choice to drink it, which stems from your desires in some way. And that seems just fine. It would be bizarre to regard an action as free if it didn't stem from your choice or your desires. It seems like we'd have to regard the action as stemming from something outside yourself, and so something that's not within your control. And so not from you, and not free. All right, so how are you guys with this? Any questions about the soft determinist's point of view? All right, the reason soft is in the title is because they're a determinist, but it's kind of like, it's a cushy determinism. It's a determinism that allows you to be happy. It's a determinism where it's a way of being a determinist that can let you sleep soundly at night, because you can still think, yes, my actions are free even though they're determined. That's the soft bit. Okay. Now notice, too, that with condition C, this is where you get the compatibilist condition being satisfied. Right? If your choices, if your actions, right, you're drinking the coffee, stems from your choice, right, if your choice is causing your action, then it's typically going to be true that if you had made a different choice, you would have performed a different action. Right, so that's the link between the compatibilist condition and soft determinism, that condition C. If that obtains, then the compatibilist condition is going to obtain. at least in typical circumstances. Okay. All right. Worries. Worries. So compatibilism and soft determinism are quite nice. They allow an easy, elegant solution to a hard set of problems, but there's trouble with the view. All right. So here are a couple of objections that are variations on Taylor's objection. So just think about these cases. All right. So first case. Call it the case of the mad scientist. So you have Ted. He's being controlled by a mad scientist. The scientist controls Ted, however, not by coercing his body or affecting his actions directly. But he controls Ted with a microchip in his brain that causes him to desire and choose to do whatever the mad scientist wants him to do. In this way, the mad scientist causes Ted to kick his grandmother in the shins. Okay? Now, here's a different case. God's will is always done. He ensures this by causing us to make the choices we make, by causing us to desire to do whatever he wants us to do. So we do nothing other than what God wants. Mother Teresa chooses to and goes on to move to India to help those who are impoverished. Here's a couple questions for you. First of all, were their actions free? And secondly, is the counterfactual true? If they had chosen to do otherwise, they would have. All right, so why don't you turn to the person next to you, or nearest to you, and discuss these two questions. All right, so let's see where we're at. So with regard to the first question, were their actions free? I'm just asking you about your intuitive reaction, what you're inclined to think. Are you inclined to think that either person performed a free action? So if you think yes, the actions were free, would you raise your hand? If you think no, would you? All right, so maybe so. Any thoughts on this? Yeah.
Well, the mad scientist's actions would have been free. In that case, he chose to control somebody else.
Well, we're actually silent on what's causing the scientist's actions. So you're right that we leave space for the possibility that his actions are free. But I just meant to ask a question about Ted, not the scientist. Whether or not Ted freely kicked Grandma in the shins. Yeah. All right. What about the counterfactual condition? If they had chosen to do otherwise, they would have. Do you think that's true in these cases? If you're inclined to think it's true, would you raise your hand? See where we're at? All right. So if you think it's not true, all right. Someone who says it's not true, would you mind sharing why? Yeah.
Like, they have that desire, which is influenced by the external forces, but they reject it if they choose to do otherwise. Like, it would still be like determinism in some way. Like, they have that desire to do it, but they reject that desire for some reason or another.
Okay. Okay. Other people? Yeah.
Well, in the case of Mother Teresa, she can't go against God's will because God's will is always done. So she can't choose to do otherwise, and Ted's being controlled, so he can't not be controlled because he is being controlled.
All right. Other? Yeah.
Because their desires are being controlled, they would realize that they have the choice to do otherwise.
All right. All right.
Programmed to choose those choices, so you can't go against that.
All right. So, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that this is a conditional claim. To say that if something had been the case isn't to say it could be the case. It might be ruled out. Right? So to say that if they had made a different choice isn't to say, and they could have made a different choice. To say if they had made a different choice is to consider a set of possibilities where they really could have, and those possibilities might not be actual. Right? Simply because, or rather, how do I explain this differently? Well, I'll just say it the way I've said it before and hope it registers, and maybe I'll try again in a second. It can be true that if they had made a different choice, they would have performed a different action, even if it's false that they could have made a different choice. Right, so I feel like the reason many of you said no is because you're not quite appreciating that fact. Right. So let's just go over it again. If they had made a different choice, this condition says, they would have done otherwise. Now, what would the world have to have been like for them to have made a different choice? Well, the scientist would have had to control him in a different way, right? The scientist would have had to make him do something different. Now, the scientist didn't do anything different. The scientist directed him to kick grandma in the shins. Right? So he wasn't going to make a different choice unless the scientist did something different. The scientist didn't do anything different, so he could not have made a different choice. Still, it's true that if he had made a different choice, he would have done something different. Similarly with the case of God. If God controls all our actions, it can still be true that so God makes us drink coffees in the morning, say. It could still be true that if we had chosen to not drink the coffee, we would have not had the coffee. It's just that God would have controlled us differently in that sort of scenario, right? God would not be controlling us so that we drink coffees. But if he controls us such that we always drink coffees in the morning, then it's going to be false that for any given morning we don't drink coffee. But it's still true that if we had made a different choice, we would have done differently. So this is important to see, because this is what generates the counterexample to compatibilism and soft determinism. This last condition is satisfied in both cases. So the compatibilist, and more particularly the soft determinist, is committed to saying the action is indeed free. But all of us responded, right? Nobody denied this, all of you raised your hands, that these are not free actions. Right? So this is a counterexample to the soft determinist's point of view. And it's a counterexample to the compatibilist's point of view. Because the compatibilist, and more particularly the soft determinist, is committed to saying these actions are free. Right? So this is a problem for the compatibilist. And that should trouble us, because if there's problems for compatibilism, then there's trouble for soft determinism, right? Because soft determinists are compatibilists. It's a part of the soft determinist picture. And if we can't be compatibilists, and therefore can't be soft determinists, we don't have this really neat, elegant, tidy solution to the fatalistic problems of last class. Right, so then that means we have to work a bit harder to unravel the problems. Right? We have to look elsewhere for answers. All right, so let's see if we can't look elsewhere for answers. Let's see if we can't look elsewhere for... well, maybe before I move on, any further questions about what's going on here? Yeah.
With both of them, don't they have constraints on that? You've got somebody controlling you, so with the compatibilism, you have to not have constraints or obstructions. But having somebody forcing you, controlling you to do something, that's a constraint.
So the kind of forcing is indirect. So when Taylor outlines his non-constraint condition, he means that, right, if you're going to, I think his example is, I can't actually recall what his example is, but if you're going to freely like bend your finger so that it unproblematically touches the back of your hand, it has to be such that there's nothing preventing you from doing that. And nothing, oh, hold on, that's the no prevention. No constraint is the one you asked about. Right, why is this satisfied? Yeah, it's the direct-indirect difference. So the soft determinist, recall, says your actions are free so long as they flow from yourself. But it's silent about what brings you to a place where you choose to do something. So the way of control is different. Right? What's bringing you to act stems not from something directly forcing you, but something that's manipulating your mind that's leading to your actions. So it's the non-direct character of the constraint that matters. Mm-hmm.
But is there like ever a case where if they had chosen to do otherwise, they would have is not true? Since
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of more like you could have chosen, like even though you were controlled, you could have done something else, and you would have, but like, that means in like every single case it'd be true, right?
Not every case. I'm not now choosing to fly. But if I had chosen to fly now, it's not true that I would have. Right? I don't have that ability. Right? There's all sorts of things I can't do, even if I choose to do them. Right? There's a sort of ceiling on the level of mathematics I'm able to perform. Even if I chose to perform, highly advanced mathematics, right? I would fail. There's all sorts of things, cases, actions, where this condition would not be satisfied.
So it's like more of a laws of nature thing.
It's more of a what?
A laws of nature, like a physics thing rather than mentality.
Well, there's different things that could prevent you from being unable to bring about what you choose to bring about. So the examples I gave aren't tethered to the laws of nature, but like my psychological limitations, right? There's certain things I just can't do given my brain power. But there are also things I can't do because of the laws of nature, right? I can't will a pig to fly voluntarily without the aid of any external device. I can't bring that about even if I chose to. And that's because of the laws of nature. So there's a variety of things that can conspire to prevent you from bringing about a state of affairs that you choose to bring about. Or at least attempt to choose to bring about. Yeah. All right. So Taylor thinks this is a big problem. All right, so it seems like we're back to square one. Let me just remind you of 3 problems that seem to indicate we don't have free will, or or at least if certain assumptions are true, we don't have free will. So there's the eternalist four-dimensional, right? The eternalist four-dimensionalist says the future already exists. If the future already exists, all your actions already exist. So what you will do is already set, and you're just going to live out what's already set. You're, in fact, in a sense, already now living out what's set because the future is already there. So you can't do otherwise than what's being done now by you in the future. The problem with theological fatalism has to do with an omniscient being knowing what you will do. Recall, knowledge is factive. Knowledge can't be false. So if you know something, then it's true. So if there's an omniscient being who knows everything you will do in the future, it's true you will do all of those things. And so you can't do otherwise than what the omniscient being knows you will do. So it seems like what you will do is unavoidable, right? And therefore not free. And lastly, the problem of logical fatalism. This has nothing to do with an omniscient being. This just has to do with 2 plausible principles of logic. The central one being the law of excluded middle, which says every statement is either true or false. And so every statement about your future actions right now has one of those 2 values and not both. So it's either true that you're going to kick grandma on the shins, or it's false that you're going to kick grandma on the shins next time you see her. Now, if it's false now that you're going to kick grandmother in the shins next time you see her, then you're not going to kick grandmother in the shins next time you see her. And you can't avoid that. It's true now that that's how the future is going to be. Right? That's just a straightforward implication of this principle of logic. And so on for every statement about your future actions. As it turns out, there is actually a nice way of resolving each of these 3 problems. Okay. Let me start with an analogy. All right. There's a difference between something being true and then us having an explanation for why it's true. So take the statement, the Statue of Liberty is large. Now, if you've not seen it on any TV show, just know it's quite big. It's huge. All right. What makes that sentence true? Why is it true that the Statue of Liberty is huge? Well, it's true. The sentence, that is, the statement, the Statue of Liberty is large, is true because the world is a certain way. What way is the world? The world is such that the Statue of Liberty is quite large. Right? It's a fact about the world that explains the truth of the statement. Right? The statement is true because the world is a certain way. The statement accurately reflects how the world is. Okay? The truth of the statement, notice, doesn't make the statue large. Right? So it's not, you got to think about the order of explanation right. The Statue of Liberty isn't large because the statement, the Statue of Liberty is large, is true. Right? It's the other way around. The statement's true because the world is a certain way. Right? The truth of the statements is conforming to reality, at least physical reality here in this example. And it's not the other way around. The world isn't conforming to the truth of statements. So why does this help? Why does this help? Well, think about the sentence, you will drink coffee tomorrow. Well, that's either true or false. Suppose it's true. For many of us, it is. What makes it true? Well, it's the fact that we're going to make a certain choice to drink coffee tomorrow. It's our choice that's responsible for the truth of the statement. Right? We're making the statement true by making certain choices. And similarly, for a whole lot of our future actions, the reason there are facts of the matter about what we will do is because we're going to make certain choices. Right? It's not the other way around. It's not as though the statement is out there and it's true, and its truth is forcing us to act in certain ways. Right? The order of explanation is reversed. we're making the statement true by making certain choices. Or, excuse me, we're making certain statements about our future choices true by making certain choices. And so notice, suppose four-dimensionalism is true. Fine, right? There's a future out there that exists. It's as real as the present, and it involves me doing stuff. So long as the reason I'm doing particular things is a result of choices I make at future times, then I have control. And remember how we characterized free will at the beginning. It has to do with having control, actions being up to us. Just because there's a future that already exists doesn't mean the future actions are not up to us, up to me. So there's no obvious problem there. Similarly, suppose there is an omniscient being who knows all the future facts, God, right? The reason he knows what you're going to do in the future is because you're going to make certain choices, right? And if you had or were to make different choices, God would just know those other things. In other words, your future choices are responsible, at least in part, for God's knowledge. It's not as though God knows it and you have to do what God knows you'll do, as though like a machine that wraps around you and forces you to perform actions. That's not the way to think about it at all. And so it's a mistaken assumption of these three fatalistic arguments: the argument from four-dimensionalism, the argument from theological fatalism, and the argument from the laws of logic, that automatically we have a problem with free will. Right? They get the order of explanation wrong. Okay. Now I pause. Make sense? Comments or questions? Great. All right. So what haven't we talked about? Well, we haven't talked about the problem of determinism. All right, this is a more difficult problem. This is a more difficult problem. Because on the determinist view, your actions are actually controlled. Right? The past and the laws of nature actually determine what you will do. Right? So this is much more a picture of reality forcing you to do certain things. And so this sort of order of explanation business that we talked about previously with the other arguments doesn't apply here. So the problem of determinism is much more difficult to respond to. All right, so I lay out one way of formulating the argument. I'm not going to take the time to go over it. One simple solution is to deny determinism. And this is not an unmotivated way of solving the problem, right? If you take chemistry classes long enough, you study quantum mechanics, and you get scientists telling you that there's reason to think that there are non-determined events at the quantum level. And so determinism is false at the level of the really small things, and maybe we can turn that into an argument for thinking that determinism is false at the level of big things like us. And maybe this could even trickle down to our actions, right, so that we can act freely, so long as we can tell the right kind of story. Now, to settle this question, right, you got to do more. You got to be in a different department. As philosophy students, as a philosopher, we can't sort of sit in our chairs and reflect on this question: is determinism true, and settle the matter. But let's just suppose that determinism's false, right? So let's just think about the logical consequences of taking determinism to be false. Now you might think, oh, well, if determinism were false, then sure there could be free will, right? Turns out there's an argument for thinking that even if determinism's false, you couldn't have free will. All right. So call this the compatibilist's revenge, right? Compatibilism got dealt a blow, right? The blow involving the mad scientist case, right? The blow Taylor dealt. Well, the compatibilist has a certain kind of comeback. And Kane talks about this in terms of what he calls the intelligibility problem. And basically the problem is this, or at least the conclusion of the argument is this. Free will is not just perhaps incompatible with determinism, it's also incompatible with indeterminism. So no matter what, the non-compatibilist is in a position where they have to reject the logical possibility of free will. All right, let me unravel that for you. Let me help you make sense of this. All right, so why think that there's a fundamental conflict between indeterminism, right? Garden of forking paths, right? That picture. Well, I think that there's a problem between that and acting freely. Well, the argument is that if the future is genuinely open, then there's no fact of the matter about which way reality will go at any given fork. It might go one way, it might go the other, and whether or not it goes one way rather than the other is a matter of chance, right? It's not determined. Okay. So whenever you get to a fork, chance somehow determines which way history turns out. Right? So suppose it's not determined whether or not you'll have coffee tomorrow. Right? So there's no fact of the matter about when it comes time to order the coffee, whether or not you'll get coffee or tea or something else. Maybe you'll get coffee, maybe you won't. Right? What happens is up to chance in some sense. And the worry is that if our actions are a result of chance, then they're not our actions, right? They're actions that stem from chance, not from us. But what does it take for an action to be free? Right? Remember the characterization we started with. It has to be an action that's up to you, it's under your control. You're the source. You're the origin. How could you be the source of your actions? How could you be the origin of your actions? How could what you do be up to you when what you do is a matter of chance? So if what you do is a matter of chance, it's not, yeah, your actions aren't determined, but they're also not free. They're not under your control. They're not from you. They're from chance. Or so the argument goes. All right, so let's think about this a little bit more. All right, so here's the key assumption. If an action or choice is undetermined, then it's caused by chance, and so is not controlled by the agent. And if it's not controlled by the agent, then it's not up to you, and the action's not yours, so it's not freely chosen by you. All right, so I mean, there are two aspects to this. So there's the intelligibility aspect, and then there's just the thought that chance is incompatible with an action being yours. Let me talk about the unintelligibility aspect. So you made it a choice to attend lecture today, right? It wasn't a choice everybody made, right? There are fewer people in here who are actually signed up for and will be marked in this unit. But you all made a particular choice, right? And your choice to attend lecture today stemmed from your desires and your beliefs, your interests, all coalescing in a certain kind of way that you decided, yeah, I'll go listen to Paul this morning. Now, on the indeterminist picture, right, reality could have gone two different ways up to your point of choice, right? There's a point at which you made the decision to come here. If you freely decided to come here, then it has to be the case on the indeterminist point of view that you could have decided not to. And you could have decided not to even given your desires and interests and beliefs being just as they were prior to you making the choice you actually made. So what were your desires and interests and beliefs prior to making the decision you actually made? Well, there are beliefs like this, right? It's good that I attend lecture. It will help me understand a few more things that were difficult. It's good for me to attend lecture because then I don't have to do the readings quite so carefully. It's good for me to attend lecture. Right? So whatever beliefs you have, right? Just think about the reasons for which you came here. And your desires, right? Maybe you really like coming to lecture, or maybe you had nothing better to do. There are a certain set of desires that coalesced with your beliefs and perhaps other facts about you that brought you here. Now, the indeterminist says, keep all that fixed, right? Change nothing about that description of your mind and your situation. Well, if your actions aren't determined, then even given all of those same facts about that preceded you're making the choice to show up, you could have made a different choice. The unintelligibility worry is that really intelligible? could the world have been just the way it was, just up to the moment of choice, and you have made a different decision? Right, suppose you're one of, I hope there's many of you who are like this. Suppose you're one of the people in here who really likes philosophy. Who doesn't only really like philosophy, you really like hearing Paul talk about philosophy. You don't just like hearing Paul talk about, you really like the topic of free will. I mean, these things really get you going. Like, this is why you started university. All right, so maybe there's no one who satisfies this description. But suppose you do, right? If you freely chose to come today, then it has to be true that all of that's true of you, and yet you decide, nah, I'm not going. And the unintelligibility worry is like, really? All of that could be true of you, and you just decide not to come? Right, so that's the worry. All right, so there's two problems. The unintelligibility problem, and then this idea that if chance is involved, actions are not under your control. And actions which are not under your control are not really free. Okay. All right, so we get to Kane. Kane says we can make sense of what's going on here. All right, we can solve the problem. Says there is a way of thinking about indeterminism that doesn't generate problems. He says what matters is the source of the indeterminism. What matters is what brings it about that a choice is not determined at a given point. All right, so he says, don't think of the chance event being somehow external to you, but imagine it being arising internally from you. So think about a situation where you have a woman who's on her way to a career-making meeting. Her presence at this meeting, she knows, will make her career. She's been working for this for a really long time. She's studied a very particular course of study at university. She's made a lot of sacrifices. Right? Her life has been building to this moment. But she's a morally decent human being. And she sees someone being accosted in a dark alleyway on her way to this meeting. Being a decent human being, she really cares to help prevent what's happening, or at least stop it as soon as possible. But if she chooses to intervene, she's going to be late for the meeting, and that's going to ruin her chances of, the promotion and advancement and so on. All right, so she's going to be in a state of conflict, right? She has one motivational structure, right? The one set of desires, one set of interests, one set of beliefs, conflicting with another, right? The set of interests, the set of desires, the beliefs directed towards career advancement and achieving her career goals. The other set of desires and beliefs and so forth have to do with her just being a decent human being. And these are tugging in two different directions, right? One says, let the person get accosted, get to that meeting. The other says, be a decent person and call the police and maybe shout. But just do whatever you can. Right, so Kane says, well, we can imagine indeterminism arising in the conflict between these two motivational structures. If the reason her choice is not determined is due to the conflict of these two motivational structures, then chance can have a role to play, right? It might be a matter of chance which motivational structure wins. Right? Maybe the career advancement structure wins, maybe the decent human being structure wins. Right? And it's a matter of chance which wins. Still, even if it's a matter of chance which wins, her eventual action is going to be a result of her choices. Right? It's just going to be a result of the choices made by one of the conflicting sets, one of the conflicting motivational structures. So the eventual choice will stem from her, and it will stem from her interests, and she will be the one making the choice. It was just a matter of chance which aspect of herself would win out in that situation and would end up making the choice that led to the action. And so the thing to notice is that this is a logically possible way of understanding indeterminate events involving our choices, resulting from ourselves, and still having an element of chance involved. So Kane lays out a notion he calls plural voluntary control. Right, so again, just think this picture, right? You've got this individual. They've got two conflicting motivational systems pulling her in different directions. They generate a chance event. It's not determined which way history will go, whether or not she'll help or not help. One wins. It's a matter of chance which wins. But look, even though it's a matter of chance which one wins, the following conditions are going to be satisfied. This person's able to bring about whichever option they will. Right? So if the help motivational structure wins, then they help. And so they were able to help. And they chose to help by making, well, the choice. Right? So it stemmed from them. They did it at the time they willed to do so. Right? In this picture Kane paints, this is also true. They do so for the reasons they willed to do so. Right? Part of having one of these two conflicting motivational structures is having certain reasons pulling you in the direction of a certain action. And when you will to perform, say, the helping action, there are reasons guiding that choice you make. Right? So a person's able to act for the reasons they willed. They're able to do so on purpose. Right? If one motivational structure wins, and a person acts for reasons, then they're acting on purpose. All right? They're not being coerced or compelled by anything external to them. Right? It's not as though there's some third factor external to the woman forcing her to do one thing rather than the other. Her action is resulting from things within her. It's resulting from her. All right, just can't give us any more conditions. All right. So here's the thing to notice. Just because chance might be involved doesn't mean that one's actions aren't up to them or under their control. Right, so the compatibilist revenge argument is this. Even if indeterminism's true, and even if free will is not compatible with determinism, free will is not compatible with indeterminism either. They're logically inconsistent. They're logically incompatible. Because if your actions result from chance, they're not your actions. Kane says, no, that's not true. You move too fast. What matters is how we think about the chance action arising. And so long as chance, the role of chance is to determine which among two conflicting motivational sets wins out in a conflict, then the action is under your control. It is up to you. And it can be free. So there is no logical incompatibility between free will and indeterminism. All right. I think we say in the reader, Lewis might be the most difficult reading you'll encounter. I think we have to change that because we added the Kane reading after the Lewis reading was there. And I think the Kane reading is actually a bit more difficult. But nothing gets more difficult than the Kane reading. And I think as it happens, you're not even marked on the Kane reading at all. So don't be discouraged if you read the Kane reading and you found this difficult. If now sitting in lecture, you're puzzling about Kane's answer. Things from here on out are a bit more tractable for introductory students. So anyway, have a good time at tutorials. Bring your questions to your tutor. Feel free to email me as you have questions. I'll stick around for a little bit if you've got lingering questions. We'll see you later. Yeah. Uh-huh.